graduate, Air Force fighter pilot, test pilot, master's degree in aeronautical engineering, flew Gemini 7 and Apollo 8, Air Force retired Colonel Frank Borman. Air Force and Navy fighter pilot, both engineer, research test pilot for NASA, flew Apollo 13, Fred Haise. West Point graduate, Air Force fighter pilot, has a PhD from MIT in astronautics, flew Gemini 12 and Apollo 11, Buzz Aldrin. Air Force fighter pilot from the F-100. I went to the test pilot school at Edwards. He is the youngest American astronaut flying the X-15 at age 32. He was backup crews for 2 Apollo flights, but also flew Cap Commander 2 STS shuttle missions, and is the only shuttle commander to pilot the shuttle from orbit to full stop landing at Edwards manually. This is retired Major General Joe Engel. Guys whose last name ends in W get stuck all the time. Darn it. West Point graduate engineer degrees, interceptor test pilot, flew Apollo 15, retired Air Force Colonel Al Worden. Al?
And Apollo 11, and then there was Gemini, I'm sorry, not Apollo. Gemini 10 and 11, and then there was a fellow, I don't know where it came from, he said, why don't we use water immersion to simulate zero gravity? And so on Gemini 12, and I'll let Buzz tell the rest of the story because he's the one that actually, in a boys' pool in Baltimore, we were able to sink a simulation of the spacecraft. And we put Buzz in a space suit, which could be just as well underwater as it is in space. We made him neutrally buoyant. We said, Buzz, don't try to swim. And then we went down and looked at various handholds and footholds. But Buzz did all that work to come up and make Gemini 12 successful.
So Buzz, what was that training like for you?
Well, I'm glad that, you hearing me okay?
Yeah, fine.
I'm glad that Jim gave us all the preliminaries all about EAA, you know. Now this maneuvering unit, the AMU, it was the #1 Air Force experiment on the whole program. And the crew that was originally going to fly on Gemini 9 was commanded by Elliot C., a civilian General Electric test pilot, and perhaps one of the best Air Force test pilots we had, Charlie Bassett, my backdoor neighbor. So an Air Force person was going to fly the #1 Air Force experiment. Well, unfortunately, that crew went into St. Louis in a snowstorm, and they crashed into their hangar where their spacecraft was, and both of them were killed. My backdoor neighbor. So the backup crew took over, and now we have, instead of an Air Force test pilot going to fly the Air Force #1 experiment. Now we have a Navy test pilot who's going to fly the #1 Air Force experiment. Now this is the way you should have told it from the Navy. Now, when some engineers in Baltimore decided that it would be a good idea maybe to train in a different way, and a few of you test pilots said, well, how in the world can you simulate being in a vacuum up there like being underwater, you know, moving around? Well, see, I've been scuba diving for 8 or 9 years at the time, and I really felt that this was going to work, and it really did. And we did a lot of good training. I can remember standing in the pool, waist deep, seeing Gemini 11 lift off. You remember that? Well, where were you? You were supposed to be there with me. Oh, he was watching me, yeah. Well, anyway, Gemini 11's rendezvous didn't go too well either. So the pressure really was sort of on us. The last flight, out of 4 main missions of the whole Gemini program were long duration space flight, computer guided re-entry, rendezvous in space, and spacewalking, so that we would know how to do things out on the lunar surface. And I had done a little bit of studying about rendezvous. As a matter of fact, while I was at MIT, I got a call from Ed White, who I'd known from West Point. We were in the same fighter squadron. And he said, you know, I've been through the test pilot school, got a master's degree, I'm testing airplanes. And he said, I'm going to volunteer for this second selection process of astronauts. This was
I think
62.
was EVA.
I know.
We solved that.
I'm getting to it. But Ed said, I'm qualified. And I said, well, okay, so I haven't been through the test pilot school, but I'm doing some pretty interesting things up here at MIT. Now, I was picked in the 3rd group. Now, I show up in this program with all these experts, and I happened to get involved in the training of some of the astronauts, Wally Schirra and Tom Stafford, and some others for the early So I remember having a conversation with Deke Slayton. I said, you know, I would really like to be along on one of these rendezvous flights in the Gemini program. And when you ask Deke Slayton something, you don't get an answer right away. And so I went out, and the next thing I know, Jim Lovell and I are assigned to the backup crew on Gemini 10, which means that they have, when it flies, they have a crew for 11 and 12, so we were going to be prime crew on Gemini 13. There is no 13, so Buzz was not going to fly on the Gemini program until there was a tragedy. My backdoor neighbor. And so we backed up 9, and then we became prime crew on 12.
Buzz, what were in the EVA, what were you able to do in the EVA in 12 that Gene was not able to do in 9?
Well, we had excellent foot restraints by this time. I mean, you could put your foot in the foot restraint, and there was just no getting at it. You could take one foot back and lean over, and you were still attached. They were called the golden slippers. They were really wonderful. And as I was training for this astronaut maneuvering unit, and I really felt like we were going to have a really good, successful last mission, and somehow NASA felt that the series of missions where spacewalking had not been too successful, and they decided to cancel this #1 Air Force experiment and the whole Gemini program. And it was my biggest mistake not to tell them that I really knew what I was doing with the kind of training underwater. But I let it go, and they removed that experiment, and instead there were just sort of Mickey Mouse things to do in the back of the adapter, hook a piece of Velcro together, screw this thing, and throw this switch. And so obviously it was a very successful rendezvous.
But
I mean, EVA.
EVA, yeah.
So what did we do? We went to a Navy place, Pensacola, and everybody got checked out in scuba diving. Even the Navy guys.
So you had a successful Gemini 12, which was the end of the Gemini program, right, Gene? That was it. So then we're on to Apollo, and of course, Randy, did you want to jump in with something there that I cut you off? I apologize.
No, we're fine. At the time that we were flying Gemini 12, many of us were working that mission. We were also getting ready for Apollo.
Right.
So we had the first of the Saturn launches there. So basically we had both control rooms up and operating there. And that was probably one of the toughest times from the standpoint of scheduling and training we ever had.
So Apollo 1, you know, the tragedy of the fire in Apollo 1 and losing Ed White.
And I said, you've got to take a photograph of this. And so Bill got the camera, but it had black and white film in it, and I got the color film after he yelled at me once or twice. And he put the color film in, and then of course he took the picture. But I'll let you know a little secret. I said, Bill, this is the way it goes. You compose it in this manner. You see how these lunar surface goes down this way, and the Earth comes up that way. Now, just now, okay, take it. And I show them where the button was.
I'm going to tell Bill what he just said.
You know, you could do that right now, Walt.
I
Frank.
remember there was a time when Neil was a backup on Gemini 8, and you and I were on the crew because Mike Collins was on Gemini, or the E mission to begin with.
Let's go back to the Bible. Whose idea, where did that come from for you, you three, you and Bill?
I think Frank could probably really tell more about exactly how
Long, we had to yaw around and pitch forward so the landing radar could pick up the surface. And so now we're facing forward, but still the engine is pointing. And a while after that, a program alarm comes on, and what it does is it wipes out the displays of what you're looking at, and the alarm goes, and so you shut off the alarm, and it restores it to what it is, but we don't know what the program alarm is, but there's this dictionary found between us. We were just not going to pull out the dictionary to look and see what it was, but there happened to be an engineer who had been very well schooled And I think you ought to take over from here, Jim.
Yeah, I think that's a real interesting point there, because go back and you mentioned training when we started. And by this time in the space program, the training was truly exceptional. And we had a team of controllers whose principal job was to test the team from a standpoint of knowledge, the integration with the crew right on down the line. We got a Capcom, I had Charlie Duke and this. And generally the final training run was always looked at by the team as sort of graduation exercise. While the simulation supervisor decided this team isn't ready to graduate yet. So he threw us a descent series of problems in there, one of which we started exercising or experiencing various program alarms. And we aborted, we saw the program alarms, we aborted the training run. Then SimSoup came in and says, Flight, why did you abort that training run? Your mission rule says you need 2 Qs. What was your second Q? There was none. So we got together with the Draper Labs, and overnight we learned an awful lot about the program alarms. And it's interesting, the actual descent had not fully depressurized the tunnel. We have a dumb computer on board the spacecraft, so over the period of time at 2 orbits, basically we're now further downrange.
That's the electrical problem which I first relayed to mission control. So that's how that whole sequence came, and my only regret is that I didn't incorporate it or do something.
So when you looked out at the explosion, what did you see?
Well, it dawned on me that when the accident first occurred and we lost 2 fuel cells right away, I saw that and they went out the line. But mission rules stated that if you lose 1 fuel cell, the landing on the moon is off. 1 fuel cell alone will give you enough electrical power to get around the moon and back home safely. And so there was a wave of disappointment right now, because I thought to myself, you know, I've been here already. And my idea is to land on the moon, not just to go around the moon. And then I looked up at the instrument panel, and my eyes focused on the instruments that told me the condition of 2 huge liquid oxygen tanks. And when I looked at the quantity gauge of one of those tanks, the needle read 0. And when I looked at the quantity gauge of the second and last tank, I could see the needle go down ever so slightly, but something that you would never see in the normal usage of oxygen on a flight to the moon. And that's when that old lead weight went down around your stomach, and that searing sensation you get when you're in deep trouble and don't quite know how to get out of it.
So what happened then, Gene?
Yeah, one of the things Frank mentioned earlier was the quality of the leadership we had. Throughout this entire problem, particularly in the first 24 hours, they didn't seek out briefings, etc. They're following along, and their question was, how can we help you? And that was the kind of people that we had in there. They were letting the young pups work the problem, but basically they were superb, our bosses.
So how quickly did you make decisions, and what were they about what you were going to do?
Well, the first thing was, in the first hour, it was to get the crew back on a free return trajectory and basically get them coming home. We also recognized that we're going to have to use the lunar module as a lifeboat. Now, fortunately, as a result of training, we had developed a lot of these procedures during the Apollo 9 mission. So we had a benchmark to start, but the key thing was getting the people in place to start working the problem.
So who on the ground did you have? So Fred, what was going on with you 3 guys?
Well, when this happened, I was still in the lunar module putting away things we had pulled out because we just completed a TV show. You'd appreciate that. And the show had to go on, right? So I was putting away the equipment we had pulled out. When I got up to the right seat and looked at the panel, I frankly didn't pick up the fuel cells, but I did notice that tank 2, oxygen tank 2, the quantity pressure was down, and that meant an abort. There was no question that when you lose a single critical element in a system, I didn't have to reference mission rules that I knew the landing was off. So I was just at that time sick of my stomach with disappointment. That, you know, I trained through 2 missions, and here was a big chance, and it was gone in an instant. The next thing that hit was confusion, because we had 7 caution and warning lights on, a master alarm, and a computer blue restart light. And it did not make sense, because these spacecraft are very simple. Each system stood alone on its own. They were simplex in that sense. There was no big computer that was integrating everything. So there was no way one failure could have caused all those lights in different systems. In the RCS, we had AC overload, we had DC, undervolt, and the cryogenic the lights on, and it just didn't make sense. You know, kind of in simulation, we had a rule, sort of a standing rule, that when they gave us failures, they normally would not give us one failure, more than one failure at one time in one system. It's kind of like, I guess, God was not going to be so unkind as to give us more than one failure at one time. So this was, but it turned out that many of the lights were false lights. The G-shock of the explosion had closed some of the valves, had overcome the spring tension in some of the gas and RCS valves, and valves that normally were open had been closed. Now on our panel, we had a little talkback that was gray and barber pole to a switch. You'd move to tell you it was open and closed. But we did not have, that was not connected to the valve. That was connected to the switch. So it wasn't until Mission Control, who had telemetry to the valves, noticed that and had us recycle some valves. Most of those caution warning lights went away, except the ones obviously involved with the electrical system.
There was one little incident that's kind of interesting, because it shows some of the thought process that's going through. Of course, we lost 3 fuel cells, 2 oxygen tanks, computer went off the line, and in Mission Control, when they first saw the instrumentation on their consoles that were reflected through, coming down from telemetry from our instrument panel, the first thing was, hey, no, this has got to be a communications problem. You know, we can't lose 3 fuel cells, 2 oxygen tanks, and do all this at one time. I mean, don't we believe in redundancy? Don't we have reliability, 16 nines or something like that? And so it was a little time, wasn't it? Until finally it dawned on everybody. And meanwhile, Fred and I were sneaking our way into the lunar module to find out just what we had to work with.
And what did you have to work with? What did you have to do in terms of maintaining electrical power?
Well, the first thing, I think that Gene was correct. We had to transfer the guidance system from the dying command module to the lunar module. Now, the two are not made it exactly in the same X, Y, Z planes. So there was a correction that we had to do from the angles that the command, that Schweikert sent to me, to what I had to put the correction in before I could put it into the lunar module computer system, to make sure that the guidance system of the lunar module corresponded to the same position of the spacecraft that we had that we did have. And so I got the angles, and then I asked them to say, would you check my arithmetic?
You were doing this manually. With
yeah, in those days we did things manually. I had a pencil, and I had my little checklist, and it said, I put the angle in, and there was the correction that I had to do, and then I wrote it out. And so I called them up, and I wasn't afraid to ask anybody if 2 and 2 are really 4 in this particular issue.
Yeah, you have to really appreciate how dumb the computers we had in those days. Because really the ones we had in Mission Control, 90% of the computing resources associated with trajectory. Only a very small percentage was associated with driving displays. So basically this was a pencil paper computation we had to get, and it had to be perfect.
So what happened next, Jim?
Well, we got through, and of course Mission Control called up and said, you're in the lunar module? We said yes, and we're turning on the system, so we transferred the guidance. And they said then that this is the best idea to get us back on the free return course. That free return course would get us back around the moon, back down to the Earth, and hopefully it would be a safe passage through the atmosphere. And that was something which we really wanted, because at the time that we were, or the course that we were on when the explosion occurred was not a free return course. If we didn't have the main propulsion system this time, we lost that along with electrical power and the oxygen. Consequently, if we went around the moon and came back to the Earth, the closest point of approach to the Earth would have been about 40,000 miles out. And consequently, we were in this hybrid long elliptical orbit, and we could be there for decades, just going out 240,000 miles, the apogee, coming back around Earth, but not close enough. So we had to get back on that for return course, and that's where, of course, Mission Control had us and how they wanted us to make the maneuver.
Yeah, basically the key thing was
the chutes came out and we finally slowed down, and it appears that everything was great. Okay. Swigert says, listen, let's not tell them that we're okay. This might make a good movie.
And by the way, how many of you are aware that Jim was actually in the movie?
Yeah.
Whole new career there, Jim. Looking for it. So that's Apollo 13. Gene, you look like you're...
Yeah, one last comment on the splashdown. Once the crew got aboard the carrier, we had a sweetheart deal with Cigar Institute of America. We went through 14 boxes of cigars there.
So 13 made it. Joe Engel, was on the backup crew for 14. And later on, he got bumped off 17. You really seemed to get a bump that wasn't fair. Anyway, especially off of 17. But tell us about 14. How successful was 14 and what was its mission, Joe?
14 was Al Shepard's mission, of course, and Ed Mitchell and Stu Rushin. And I happened to be with Gene Cernan and Ron Evans in the backup crew for Apollo 14. So we were continually nipping at their heels to try and see if we couldn't get them to sprain an ankle or turn a knee or something. We did. We in fact, Al set up a kind of a crew retreat at a friend's cabin in Colorado, and Al did things right always. We got there, and there were 6 Kawasaki mountain bikes there for us to ride. And Ron and I looked at each other, Gene and I actually looked at each other and said, here's our chance. Because you guys are all competitive, and we decided we would have this contest. They were in a parking lot with a dirt berm that kind of went up, and they graded off a lot of levels. So we tried these Kawasaki's out, running up there, jumping, and seeing how far we could jump with the motorcycles, and thought, this is it. This is a good deal. We'll get Al good.
Yep.
How heavy is this instrument tonight?
That right there, it's not that heavy actually.
Oh, that probably not. Where's the other room?
dense.
Well, it's basalt.
It's basalt.
It's basalt, which is, you know, almost as hard as granite.
So it does. So it is. It is really dense.
Yes. Yes.
It's really cool.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The other one, the one that's in the museum?
This is the one from the museum.
Yeah.
This is the one in the museum? What was the one that was there?
Well, that one is in the museum as well. But under the
But I didn't see the one that you could touch.
yeah, this is the touchable one.
They took it this morning when I went up there.
I didn't see it there.
They said they're not going to bring it back till next week after the thing. That's why I went there 3 times to see it.
Oh, I was there Monday.
EAA gift shop, I think they have some. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Seriously. Have a good night.
She missed it. All right, get on it.
I have the case. I have the case. I know. I've got it.
All right. You got it?
Go on.
You got that Ancient Aliens.
Oh man.
Notice that they put it in the pyramid too.
I did. There must be some significance to that.